Welcome to the Outsourcing Nearshore versus Offshore webinar. My name is Eric Walton, and I am the COO for Tiempo Development, your host for today's webinar. During the webinar, we are going to hear from an industry expert, Roger Fordham, on the state of the software industry and outsourcing. Please note that you can send questions at any time during the webinar by using the GoToWebinar toolbox in the questions section. The presentation will last approximately 30 minutes, and we will address the questions at the end of the presentation. Roger is going to share his software development experience from around the world, what worked and what didn't. We will explore the nearshore value proposition. We're going to discuss the cultural differences with other countries and their impact to you and your projects. We will share some tips on successful outsourcing, and I will give you a short overview of Tiempo Development near the end. We'll take questions and answers, and then we'll have some closing remarks. So I'd like to introduce Roger Fordham, VP of Software Engineering for Tiempo Development, where he leads the software development and testing operations in Sonora, Mexico. Like he has done before in many other countries, Roger is responsible for building a world-class development organization in Mexico through quality processes, talent acquisition, training and development, and operations management. Mr. Fordham is an acclaimed software development expert and has lectured at many national and international conferences related to software development, software engineering, software quality, and culture. Without further delay, here is Roger Fordham.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Roger Fordham. Thought I'd start off by just going one step deeper, give you a little view of the most recent background in this context. For the past 20 years, I've been involved in establishing, starting up, managing, developing, nurturing, training software development centers of a very high maturity all across the world. The little list in the lower right corner indicates a primary set of those organizations. It's been a pleasure to be involved in this. This was whilst I was working at Motorola, and we built what is come to know as the Global Software Group, which ended up as 8,000 software engineers in 23 locations in 16 different countries. And with that background, let me start off. Let's move off onto the issue at hand. Outsourcing issues. I'm going to start maybe with the most important question right at the top here, and then why are we doing it? So I think it's important to understand there are many reasons why you might outsource. One might be to reduce cost. Another one might be to allow you to focus on your core processes, therefore outsourcing less core process to others. There may be quality improvement issues you want to attack. There may be innovation issues you want to attack. There are a number of reasons why you'd want to do this. The major two, probably the 70 to 80% of the reasons, are generally cost control and or core focus. All right, so with that in mind, it's important to have that there so that when you structure your reasoning behind your decision, that's uppermost in your mind. So let's move on then and talk about a few other of the issues. There are many issues that will contribute to your decision one way or another, and I've tried to group them in a very high-level view here since we only have a short time to discuss them. So let's look at costs. So here we are with the cost issue, and many people see through this as a reduced labor cost, which is in fact true. Many of the basic labor costs overseas are lower than they are in the U.S. and in Western culture at large. But that's only where you start. There are increased costs of travel to get there, for them to come to see you, to work on your project. There's infrastructural issues. There are on-costs that are unseen on salary. To give you an example, most of U.S. engineering costs are salary costs of engineers. If you look at those cost bases in other parts of the world, you find that may end up being only a third to a half of the real costs. So there are loads of hidden costs that are not in the U.S. model. So those need to be carefully considered when you're looking for the benefits you expect. Then there's, moving around my circle here, there's the capability issues. There's a match now between your capabilities and theirs, or maybe in the beginning there is a perceived immatch of that. So I think it's very important if you understand you or we seeking for outsourcing are going to be the domain experts. We're going to know our product. We're going to know what we want and what we're doing, and we're seeking somebody else to help us with an element of that. The people we seek, the outsourcing organization, are probably going to have high skills at developing solutions for problems, but are not going to be necessarily as domain knowledgeable as you are. So that leads to a whole series of productivity cycles. So in the beginning, productivity between the relationship may be much lower. That, of course, contributes to a higher cost because you may need more people to do the work. So beware of those issues. They're real and they're there. Some of them are perceived, but many of them are real. So let's move away from capability issues to culture issues. And this is perhaps a huge issue which one could spend hours discussing in detail the nuances of and how it impacts. But at this point, let me just raise the issue that there's a business culture which is different between a U.S. Western culture and other business cultures in the world. Practices that are perceived as good in some cultures are not perceived as good in others, and one needs to understand that. And a lot of those cultures, business cultures, are predicated on national characteristics. And we'll get into talking some of that, but there are national characteristics in many non-U.S. countries which have to do with corruption and graft, which impact their behaviors, what is considered acceptable, etc. So we'll talk about some of those things more. The other issue that is very easy to perceive here is the time zone proximity, travel proximity, and in some cases political proximity issues. I have some slides that go into this in more detail later on to make it very obvious what's going on. But generally speaking, most of our outsourcing partners are sleeping when we're awake and vice versa. Travel, very hard to travel around the world. A lot of jet lag issues, a lot of personal wear and tear issues. And let's move on to politics a little here. I have two particular stories that I'd like to represent here. One, living in India, at that time, the Pakistan government launched their first nuclear test, and that generated a huge political issue that nearly went to war. So the important thing to realize there is no matter where you are in the world, at any time there can be political issues that flare up that cause reactions in country, shut down borders, control communications, stop data flowing through networks, etc., that are all in some part to do with proximity-related issues. I'm going to move off the general big picture here, and let me take some specifics. Let's look at some specific countries. Let's look at some things that worked well, and let's look at some things that were challenging or one view didn't work so well. So moving to India. What worked well? Well, there's a high degree of well-educated people. The best schools in India are equivalent to the best schools in the U.S., and we hired those sort of people. English speaking. As a result of a couple of hundred years as part of the British Empire, the Indian professional speaks very good English, albeit a slightly different vocabulary that you and I have, but great English, great supply of labor, therefore. And for the past 20 years, there's been a lower but increasing cost of that labor. Back in 20 years ago, there was the beginning of a process movement around the world in software development, and the Indian outsourcing organizations picked that up and started to run with it. In fact, back in '93, the first Indian software development organization was given an SEI level 5, which is an extremely high maturity capability measure. I was in that organization. I was part of that assessment team, and it began to show the world that India was a capable software development outsource organization, and in large part became the jewel in the crown of that entire activity. So for the last 20 years, they've been developing their process capability along with the rest of industry, and now perform extremely well, and you can find excellent process capability there. The government has put together programs to support the emergence of software development offshoring capability in their software technology program. And that has helped to cut through some of the issues that don't work so well, and I'll point those out as we move on to there. Of course, what doesn't work so well is the fact that India is the antithesis of our time zone. So when we are working, they are sleeping, and when we are sleeping, they are working, which causes a lot of late night, early morning communications, and adds to a cycles of delay in getting issues resolved. There's